Okay, I think it's about time I got around to doing a full review of the Metaspeed Tokyos. Now, I was considering whether I was going to do two separate reviews for the Edge and then the Sky, but the more and more that I've been running in these shoes, the more I'm realizing that they are actually just very, very similar. And a lot of the things that I would say about each of these shoes would end up being the same, especially in the uppers, the outsole. The general feel of the midsole, honestly, is getting more and more similar the more that I'm running in them. So I thought I'd save you some time, save myself some time, and put them together in a dual review. So we'll run through a fair bit of stuff which is shared, and then I will make distinctions when we get around to the ride so that you can understand the slight differences to expect. And then we'll run through some price point chat. We'll compare them to a few other models out there as well, and get into some discussions about where you could use a shoe like this. So starting off with the specs, both of these shoes are coming in with a full stack height of 40mm of foam in the heel. We have a 5mm drop in both of them. As I've explained, and as everybody probably knows, we have a different plate construction in each of these shoes, with the Edge having a scoop down from the heel into the forefoot and then back up in a bit of a spoon shape, compared to the Sky, which is a bit flatter, sits closer to the foot, and then runs all the way through with a tiny bit of a scoop up at the end. The foam configuration is also different. We have a new Flight Foam Leap compound, which is an aliphatic TPU. They have that on at the top layer of the Edge, the bottom layer of the Sky, and then they've alternated that with the Flight Foam Turbo, which is the firmer PEBA foam, having that in the heel section of the Edge, and a small thin top layer in the Sky, which gives you this nice complement of firmer, punchier, and the new softer compressive Flight Foam Leap. Both of the shoes are weighing 184 grams in my men's size 10.5, which means that they're about 30 or 40 grams lighter than most racing shoes on the market right now, but we will chat about that relevance more in the ride. Whether the weight is making that much difference, I'm not persuaded. We'll chat about that soon. Starting off with the upper of these shoes, they are pretty much matched here. We have a fairly flexible, unstructured mesh in both of them, which is extremely breathable and is actually quite a high volume fit as far as super shoes go. So through the forefoot, you can see how much space we have above the kind of toe box area. This is definitely more high volume, more accommodating. Although it's not super wide in terms of the midfoot, I do think it just has that little bit of extra material, which could suit a fair few more feet. Heel counter, I absolutely love. I think ASICS have one of the best heel counters on the market. The way that they wrap this kind of felty feeling material up over the back works fantastically. I think the lockdown is decent. I'm not sure that it's the easiest to find. We don't have a heap of padding on this ankle collar portion here. No padding in the tongue as well, so there's not a heap of forgiveness. But with the serrated laces, I do think it is quite easy to kind of adjust the fit once you've got the laces tied. So you can kind of tie the laces up here and then pull a lace down here to pull it down. And with the serrations on the lace and how they catch in the eyelets, you can adjust the fit easily there. So although it's not the softest and most comfortable lockdown, I do think it is pretty easy to customize, and overall with the extra volume, with a pretty simple fit, I'm pretty happy with how things have gone so far. In terms of length, I would say we're looking at true to size here. So I've gone 10.5. That has worked quite well. I wouldn't suggest the half size down if you are a narrow footer. I do think that length is pretty spot on. But yeah, if you are that narrow footer, you might not be looking for this with that high volume fit through the midfoot and forefoot. The one difference I would say in the fit between these two shoes is the presence of the arch. I found that I could notice the arch in the Metaspeed Sky Tokyo more than the Edge, which I think comes down to the presence of the firmer Flight Foam Turbo foam in the arch area here, which I do think is resisting compression a little bit more. So you get this kind of lump feeling in the area, a bit similar to the original Alphafly, which I thought I had somewhere here, maybe not. Oh, here it is. Quite similar to the way that this shoe felt, where the midsole kind of sculpted away and your foot was kind of resting over it a little bit. Although this shoe did blister me quite badly, the Sky has not given me any issues so far. It went away pretty quickly early on in the session. I do think if you are pretty sensitive to your arch being compressed or having that presence of foam there, then the Edge could be the easier pick of the two. That's one thing to stack up. But other than that, the fit is pretty much identical. Pretty happy with how the uppers lock down here. Nothing really to complain about so far pretty similar overall. Moving down to the midsole, this is where things get interesting because I do think overwhelmingly these shoes feel very, very similar. I like to quantify things in terms of percentages. I would say in terms of similarities, these shoes are, and forgive me for the hyper specific number, but I think these shoes are like 92% the same in terms of their DNA, their fit, the overall feel. There's only like 7 or 8% difference between the way that these shoes ride. Honestly, I don't really think that the differences between these shoes justify the presence of both of them. I think they could have easily gone for a halfway point between both of them and nobody would be complaining. Like, I don't think that they're so different that if someone liked the Edge, they would hate the Sky. I don't think there's going to be many people who fall into that category. But either way, I think the differences are very, very small. So in terms of the similarities in ride, they are a soft, smooth, compressive, comfortable, forgiving ride underfoot. Definitely much softer and more accommodating than the outgoing Paris series, which was quite firm, quite punchy, quite aggressive. These feel much more like a half marathon focused racing shoe where you get that nice compression, you get a nice smooth transition, you do get a bit of rebound, but it doesn't have this harsh kind of throw off the front, which honestly I was sometimes craving. With both of these shoes, I felt really settled in marathon pace, bit of threshold stuff, so in and around half marathon, I would say. 10K it could handle, but when I was trying to push down to 3-minute pace and below, been doing a few shorter, sharper intervals lately, 200, 400 meter repeats, I didn't feel like these shoes had the guts or the aggression that I was really chasing to turn the legs over as quickly. It's not that they couldn't do it, like I could still run pretty fast, but it was like they didn't have a gear which I could lock into once I actually got there to kind of hold on. With the Fast R3 from Puma, I'm going to search for shoes a fair bit here. With the Fast R3, I felt like there was a distinctive movement pattern that I could settle into when running at those faster paces, which made it quite easy to kind of settle in, find rhythm. These shoes just didn't seem to have that ability, which I do think is worth pointing out. I think for me, they're definitely a really nice half full option, but getting down into those shorter distances, I'm not sure that they have the same ability as the Paris series. In terms of the actual differences between the two of them, I found that the Edge was a little bit more forefoot focused with a bit more softness up front, and I did notice a little bit of a firmer feel in the heel, which makes sense, the chunk of Flight Foam Turbo. So I felt like I was getting a bit more of a pitch forward. If I was landing in the midfoot, I felt like the firmer foam was resisting the compression and I was kind of getting tilted forward, down, plunging into that foam and getting a little bit more of a rocker forward. Again, not a huge difference to what I felt in the Sky, but that was the kind of general feeling I was getting compared to the Sky, which I felt like was a bit softer on impact. So if I was landing midfoot, I felt like the compression eased me down into the road a little bit easier. And then I was getting a bit more of a kind of flow through the midsole, compressed through rather than tipped through. And I was getting pretty similar level of bounce by the time I got through the shoe. To be fair, I think the Sky has more leap foam than the Edge. So although you could argue that there's probably a touch more leap up in the forefoot, I do think the Sky is pretty close. And so that final impact, the final compression and rebound that you get from the foam, I do think felt quite similar. For me, in terms of preferences, I think I ever so slightly preferred the Edge in terms of that pitching feeling forwards and the feeling of plunging down into the forefoot. That's a sensation that I really enjoyed with the Cloud Boom Strike. But to be fair, had some good sessions in the Sky as well. Wouldn't be against using this instead of the Edge if I was forced to. This is a case of very, very small margins, just a slight preference in feel towards the Edge, but I would be pretty happy to go either way. And in that way, I'm not really persuaded I need to keep both of these shoes on hand. I think I could easily get rid of one or the other. Wouldn't be too fussed either way. I definitely do think that these two shoes are some of the best half and full marathon racing options on the market right now. With the weight, with the protection, the comfort level, that smooth transition, I do think they are performing really nicely. I do think for what it's worth, the stability of them is pretty nice as well. We've got a way more surface area than we did in the Edge series, and it is even lighter, which is impressive to see. I do think the stability is better in the Edge. That's probably another distinguishing factor, especially if you're a heel striker or midfoot striker. striker, you're landing on the firmer foam first, which is going to resist over compressing or tipping side to side, and I do think it just gives you a bit more quick guidance forward to get you through the shoe before you have a chance to really fall off in any dramatic way. I think in this current era of running shoe development, a lot of people are getting over obsessed with the weight of their shoes, kind of assuming that the lightest shoe is going to win, which I think is why the Evo Pro 1 had a fair bit of hype behind it. But I think now we're starting to realize that there is still, as always, other factors that play in, like the softness of the foam, the aggression of the geometry. It's not just as simple as saying lightest wins. I would happily choose a shoe which is 30 grams heavier than this if it has a bit more of a firmer feel, a bit more of a sharp geometry. I don't think it's as simple as just reducing the weight to increase the speed of shoes. I think we're getting close to finding that kind of Goldilocks zone, the kind of limit where you're finding protection but also still propulsion. I reckon that the 180 gram mark is somewhere where that line is going to fall. But yeah, right now for me, this is not the perfect all-rounder shoe, which I probably hoped it would be from the start. Coming down to the outsole, this is where I can pull both shoes back out and say that we're pretty much matched. We've got a decent coverage of rubber through the forefoot. That strip runs on the outside edge, which is perfect for me as someone who lands in a supinated position. So far, the grip has been pretty good. I'm not seeing a heap of wear, although most of it is concentrated up in that forefoot area and on that outside edge. What is an interesting feature here is that I did notice I was supinating a lot more in the Sky. You can see this scuffing on the leaf material, and it has actually shown a bit of damage as well. So whether that has actually altered my mechanics because of the plate, whether I just happen to do some faster sessions in this shoe compared to the edge, or whether the Leap foam is just less durable than the Turbo foam, which seems to have had a little bit of dirt on it, but doesn't seem to have scuffed as much. Not really sure. I do think that the edge is going to be a touch more durable in terms of outsole compared to the Sky with the aliphatic TPU. The actual foam itself I think lasts well, and in a firmer application like in the Mega Blast or the Deviate series, I do think it holds up quite nicely. But this foam does seem to be just that little bit more fragile, so I'll be interested to see how it would hold up if you were to catch a rock or a bit of glass or something like that, whether it's more likely to kind of chunk. Not too sure, but my bets are on the edge as a more durable shoe. Aliphatic TPU as a foam does have a pretty good reputation of holding up in terms of long-term durability, holding on to its bounce. I do expect to get about 500 Ks out of these shoes before they move into that more training zone, but I do think the outsole will decide a little bit of that. Coming around to the price point here in Australia, these two shoes are retailing for $380, which is pretty much exactly on average with what other super shoes are costing. $380 for the SC Elite, the Cloudboom Strike, the Alpha Fly. They're all kind of sitting around that zone, if not more now. So I can't really blame ASICS for coming in with two completely new shoes, aliphatic TPU, lightweight, and bringing that price point up from $330 to that $380 mark. The performance is definitely good enough to put it up into that zone. The technologies are there. I'm not going to complain too much about that. I do think in general, super shoes are just overpriced, which is why I have been reviewing a fair few Chinese models. So check that out if you want to find something a little bit cheaper. But in the Western world, yeah, what can you do? 380, I think, is about right. Getting into a few comparisons, I want to be pretty quick here because I realize this could drag on. First off, Fast Start 3. I think there is a similarity in terms of the sensation of compression through the forefoot, but the difference comes with the long extended rocker, which I think gives the shoe the direction, that rhythm, that aggression that I felt was lacking in the Edge and the Sky. In these shoes, I sometimes felt like I was getting to the end of my foot strike and the shoe would kind of just leave the ground, whereas in the Fast Start 3, I felt like I was being thrown forward and I had a bit more direction to it. Definitely much more aggressive, could never run a marathon in this shoe. Maybe not never, but probably not be my first choice. So this is probably 5'10" half compared to the half and full marathon for the Tokyo series. $350 here in Australia, we've got a really good end of the stick. $30 less than these. Much better pickup in my opinion if you're doing those shorter distance races, but marathon, probably safer to go for one of the Tokyos. Adios Pro 4 is somewhere around here, which I do think feels quite similar as well in terms of that level of softness and protection. This does feel a little bit more unstable with the heel cutouts here, which I do think make it quite compressive, and this medial cutout also. But I do think that the propulsion that you get from the Adios Pro 4 is maybe a little bit more directed again than the Edge and Sky. So maybe a bit more gutsy, a bit more deep in its feeling, but it definitely isn't as light and springy. So I do think it is a bit of a toss-up between wanting a bit more rocker, a bit more direction, a bit more guts compared to the light, airy feeling of the Edge and Tokyo. I'm not really persuaded there's a huge difference in performance. I do think it's just going to come down to wanting a bit more guts to it, I guess. Maybe a little bit more protection in the Adios. Upper on the Adios as well, not as high volume as the Metaspeeds. A little bit sharp on the heel counter, so that could also play in. If upper concerns are something that concerns you, then go for the Tokyos. Probably fair to compare to the original debutant of the aliphatic TPU, the Deviate Elite 3. The foam here feels a little bit punchier, a little bit more gutsy. I keep thinking of the word crunchy. I just feel like it's a little bit more, punchy in its response compared to the softer, smoother, almost marshmallowy bounce that you get out of the Tokyos. I do think it is a little bit harsher, like it's not as protective and soft and comfy, which I do think suits it to all distances, 5K all the way through to the marathon. But with that, it doesn't have the same level of stability or comfort or leg-saving freshness that I felt in the Tokyos. If I was taking one shoe for the rest of my life, I would probably lean the Deviate for its versatility. But if I was going full-blown marathon, I do think I'd lean towards either of these. Final comparison is to the new 361 Degrees Furious Future 2, which I think is quite similar when comparing to the forefoot section in the Edge. Once you get past the midfoot and you're kind of plunging down into that foam, I did get some kind of reminiscence of the Tokyo series when running in this shoe. It is a little bit different in the rest of its construction. I do think that it is a little bit more bulky. Again, a bit more of a cruisy feeling racing shoe, but that softness and that kind of sink in, I do think reminded me a bit of the Tokyo. You can pick this up for a little bit cheaper as well. I think around that kind of $200 mark on Taobao. I'll flash that on the screen. So yeah, if you're looking for a cheaper alternative with a PEBA foam instead, this could be up your street. Overall for me, the Metaspeed Tokyo series have been pretty impressive. I've been impressed by the level of protection and comfort in those longer sessions especially. I think these are definitely in the conversation for that kind of top spot marathon racing option. Was a little bit disappointed by the lack of versatility, and I am still baffled by the marketing choices around these two shoes. I'm still very skeptical about why we need both of these shoes in the same lineup. A lot of people coming into store as well are confused about it as well. Stride versus Cadence. Is there really a need for two completely different or very similar shoes for two apparently completely different sets of runners? I'm just not persuaded. If I was ASICS right now, I would combine these two shoes or just get rid of one of them, probably keep the Edge. People wouldn't know any different, and I don't think that they would be demanding a shoe with a flatter plate if you just gave them the Edge. I would keep the Edge, and then I would bring in the Metaspeed Paris, or a shoe which is very similar to this shoe, to sit below it at that $330 mark, and then you would have more of a kind of Alphafly, Vaporfly setup, which I think would be more of an easily distinguishable lineup, which can give people what they want. If you want a softer, more compressive, more rocket ride, you could go for the Edge Tokyo. But then if you wanted a more snappy, aggressive 510 half, or even if you like this shoe for the marathon, they could keep this on board as the budget alternative or cheaper alternative, which I think would still sell really, really well. That would be the way to keep two models in the lineup, not taking two shoes, making them feel very, very similar, pricing them exactly the same, making them look absolutely identical on the shop wall other than the color of the outsole and the colors of the foam that they're using. That would be the way that I would rearrange the ASICS lineup. Overall, pretty decent shoes, slightly confusing marketing. Maybe there's some better choices which could be made about how the lineup is set up. But overall, been pretty happy with these. I think you could go with either of them, and they're going to do a pretty good job as a soft, comfortable, light, airy marathon racing shoe. It's pretty good stuff from ASICS.